Why is total factor productivity slowing down even as technology improves? Productivity matters because it's the driving force for economic growth, living standards, wage increases, and competitiveness. We will be sharing our findings from the Oxford Martin working paper titled Why is Productivity Slowing Down? Along with our own course materials, we'll be looking at 4 key explanations. First, mismeasurement. Different ways of calculating output, like GDP versus GNI or real versus nominal measures, can distort reported TFP. Second is declining capital per worker, or capital deepening. Shifts in human and physical capital, highlighted by the Solo and Romer models, affect innovation and slow productivity growth. Next is trade slowdown. Changes in competitiveness and comparative advantage weaken productivity trends. And finally, allocative efficiency and market dynamics. Tensions between profit motives, resource allocation, and government intervention also contribute to the decline in TFP.
The mismeasurement and the productivity mirage. Mismeasurement is an important factor. One reason that the productivity slowdown may look worse than it really is mismeasurement. Researchers found that measured labor productivity growth fell by 0.8 to 1.8 percentage points per year across the 5 more advanced economies that we can see in the graph. Some of this drop is simply due to errors in how we measure productivity. One good example is the US. Its output per hour growth halved, and it fell from 2.62% per year to 1% per year. And this raises the question, how much of this decline is real and how much is a measurement? Free apps create uncounted output. We consume a lot of value today that doesn't show up in GDP, such as online maps, social media, or streaming platforms. These services clearly improve our lives, but because they're free, they don't appear as output in the statistics. Another mismeasurement gap can be the biases in price indices. For example, if we overestimate inflation, we're also underestimating real output. We can take, for example, semiconductors. They have an exponential performance gains that are hard to quantify in price, because the chip's performance improves extremely fast, but this improvement doesn't show up clearly in their price. Another measurement error can be the labor input mismeasurement, meaning that there's error in the numbers of hours worked. Because the way we track working hours is outdated. It overcounts how much people actually work, which makes productivity look lower than it really is. But how big was this mismeasurement effect? While mismeasurement is real, its overall impact on the productivity slowdown is relatively small. For example, the total US slowdown was of 1.61 percentage point, while due to the mismeasurement it was 0.21 percentage point. This suggests that while mismeasurement errors are a factor, deeper structural issues are the primary drivers of the productivity slowdown.
I'll unpack 2 major drivers of the productivity slowdown: the decline in capital deepening as investment shifts into intangibles, and the collapse in global trade growth after 2008. To start unpacking the slowdown, we look at capital deepening, how much extra physical capital each worker has. Using a growth accounting framework, Golden, Koutroumpis, Lafond, and Winkler show that US contributions from capital deepening contract sharply after the mid-2000s. On the chart, you can see that between 1996 and 2005, capital deepening adds 1.41 percentage points to annual labor productivity growth. In 2006 to 2017, that drops to just 0.54 percentage points, a fall of roughly 0.87 percentage points. Crucially, this isn't just an American story. Comparable contractions appear in other advanced economies like the UK, France, and Germany. So the data point to a broad advanced economy phenomenon, not a local anomaly, and the root cause is weaker accumulation of physical capital per hour worked. The traditional Solo model helps explain this. When the growth of K over L slows, output per worker slows mechanically. That's exactly what lower measured capital deepening is telling us. But Golden argues that this isn't just about firms suddenly becoming stingy. Instead, we see an investment reallocation. A growing share of spending has shifted into intangibles, software, data, systems, research and development, and algorithms, rather than classic bricks and mortar capital. The problem is that these assets are poorly captured by conventional measures, so measured capital deepening understates true investment, but it reveals a structural shift away from physical capital. Before 2005, the story looked more familiar. Physical machinery diffused widely across firms, generating broad productivity spillovers and raising aggregate productivity across the whole economy. After 2005, we move into a world of intangible capital concentration. Intangibles tend to be clustered in small group of elite superstar firms, so the economy-wide benefits shrink and spillovers become much more limited. That leads to what authors call the TFP growth contradiction. In countries like the US and the UK, intangible investment keeps rising, yet aggregate TFP growth trends downwards. This directly contradicts classic knowledge externality and endogenous growth models, which assume that more idea-based investment should translate into strong economy-wide productivity gains. Their strategic takeaway is that we might need to reevaluate policy and corporate strategy in light of localized intangible benefits and stalled aggregate growth. Of course, intangibles are hard to measure. Golden and co-authors underline the three main issues: mismeasurement risks, long diffusion lags, and potential understatement of spillovers. All of these can mean we're underestimating the true impact of intangible capital. But even despite those measurement challenges, the evidence points to a clear conclusion. The dominant driver of the slowdown is the deceleration in physical capital deepening. It is quantitatively a robust driver. It acts as the primary productivity slowdown factor, and it shows up consistently across advanced economies. Once that capital engine has weakened, the question becomes, what happened to the external engine of growth, global trade? So our third engine is global trade. In the pre-2008 era of rapid expansion from the early 1990s to the mid-2000s, world trade volumes grew roughly twice as fast as global GDP. This surge in trade fueled specialization, tightened competitive pressure, and accelerated knowledge diffusion across borders. After the financial crisis, we move into a new normal of slower growth. Annual trade growth plummets, falling from around 7% on average before 2007 to about 3% or below in the following decade. And at times, it almost flatlines, so that means the globalization engine that had been pulling productivity along is suddenly running at half speed. Golden then traces how this feeds into productivity. First, reduced trade access means weaker access to high-quality imported intermediates and machinery, curtailed technology transfers, and smaller-scale economies, especially for export-oriented sectors. For firms, that translate into softer competitive discipline, fewer international opportunities, and ultimately lower TFP. Their growth accounting results show that in open economies like Germany and the UK, a sizable fraction of the observed TFP decline is directly attributed to this trade deceleration. In other words, slower trade isn't just a side story, it's a measurable drag on productivity. The broader impact of reduced trade openness is that it diminishes cross-border knowledge spillovers that smaller economies historically relied upon. As import-driven learning channels shrink, frontier technologies spread more slowly from global leaders to followers. This widens the productivity gap between leading and lagging countries, and it reinforces the post-crisis slowdown in TFP documented in the paper. Authors also note that trade composition matters. Even when volume growth is modest, a shift towards high-tech exports can still provide a potential productivity boost. So composition can create gains even when the overall pie isn't growing quickly. However, the headline finding remains slower globalization. Slower global integration removes the early 2000s growth engine, and it compounds the drag from fading capital deepening from what we saw earlier. The result is reduced productivity growth, as weaker trade and weaker capital accumulation interact and intensify existing structural challenges for advanced economies.
The last factor in the productivity slowdown is a decline in allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency refers to how well an economy manages its resources, such as labor and capital, in order to maximize their marginal output. In an allocatively efficient economy, there would be a balance between the influx of new firms and the outflow of less productive firms. Hence, ensuring that firms are efficient and enabling workers to work in firms where their skills are used most efficiently. This process is known as creative destruction, and it ensures that productivity continues to grow. However, as of late, the process of creative destruction has been dying out. This signifies that fewer new firms are entering the market and workers are switching jobs less frequently. As a result, the question highlighted is whether a development in the sector of an economy, for example, an economy moving from the secondary to the tertiary sector, reduces creative destruction. This question stems from the fact that as economies progress through sectors, the skill of labor required increases, as do the barriers to enter a market due to economies of scale. As a result, creative destruction will be reduced, hence slowing down the productivity of labor and capital. When fewer firms are created, fewer ideas are subsequently produced, and fewer workers are able to switch jobs in firms where they would be more efficient or productive. According to Romer's model, which states that ideas and innovations are the key drivers in economic growth, when all of the above is combined, the umbrella term used would be a misallocation of resources. Although in the real world, perfect allocative efficiency is impossible. Allocative inefficiencies reduce total factor productivity.
In conclusion, this paper aims to explain why the productivity growth of labor has slowed so much in the past few years, terms and monopoly policies. It also overlooks geographical and cultural factors, rising costs, and energy costs. From what we've done in class, specifically Lecture 6, levels of trust, education, migration, and cultural differences also matter. Additionally, we felt that the paper could have talked more about innovation, quality versus quantity. Thank you for watching, and we hope that you enjoyed our project.